What's up, bike rumor fans? I'm Tyler, and this is my first ride review of the all-new Niner RIP9 RDO. This is the third complete generation will change for the RIP9 platform. It has been for a number of years now their longest travel bike. This one makes a couple of changes though. It actually drops back down in travel a little bit from the prior version, but it also is the first one that uses a flip chip system back here that lets you change the geometry a little bit, lowering the bottom back a little bit and slackening the angles just slightly. And it's also the first bike they've done with specific frames for either 29er wheels or 650B, 27.5, whatever you want to call it. So I rode the 29ers because I'm taller, I'm 6'2", I rode a size large, and it worked really well for me. So a quick note about Niners sizing. If you've been following the brand, you probably know by now, their XL is really big. And if you look at the geo charts for the new bikes, the XL by the numbers looks enormous. So I went with the large, it was the right choice. Again, I'm 6'2", about a 33, 34 inseam, pretty standard proportion. So how does this thing ride? Really good. It was immediately noticeable what they've done to bring the center of gravity lower. Like underneath, even in a big bike with big wheels, this thing felt like a BMX bike. You could really whip it around really easily on the tight twisty stuff. Like never did I feel like the bike's size was a detriment to its handling. And what you can tell, like there's a lot of mass that they move down. And so one of the new features for Niner here is this cross brace that goes around the shock, and it makes the frame a ton stiffer. And so even though, like with most full suspension bikes, you know, if you grab it, you grab the back wheel, the rear is going to flex, and most full suspension bikes with a lot of linkages do that. But the way it handles, you don't notice that on the trail at all, and it's really incredible. So I rode this with the setting in the tall setting, the high setting, and it felt good. When I looked at the numbers and Niner started, you know, promoting this thing as the longest, lowest, slackest bike they've ever made, I was concerned that I was going to be striking my pedals all the time. And there's reason for that concern because, you know, when you get lower, you're going to do that. But the other thing is the way their CVA suspension works is you can see underneath here, the lower linkage sits below the chainring. I'm happy to report that out here in Massa Marittima, where there are a lot of rocks and a lot of drops and little sections that you want to pop up and over, I didn't strike once. And that's even with standing up and powering through some really chunky rocky sections, but then also just bombing down whatever drops and everything. So that concern seemed to be kind of a moot point, which is great. Now, I haven't tried it in the low setting, but for me, the way it was set up for these trails where you're doing a little bit of climbing or sometimes a lot of climbing or a lot of descending, the tall setting seemed to work well.
The other thing I noticed is how well it climbs. The suspension, in my opinion, has always climbed pretty well. On the straight gravel road stuff, I switched it in the firm, but most of the day I just left it in the middle setting and it worked out fantastically well. So I put the camera on, you'll see a little bit of how it looks when you're climbing on single track, and then again, how the suspension's moving when it's bombing down some nice enduro trail.
So we've got one of these coming in for a long-term review. This is just sort of my first impressions, but is it all good? There's a couple things, right? So when the bikes get with these really slack seat angles, and a lot of big travel bikes, especially with 29ers, have to do something like this to make room for all the travel and that rear wheel to come up. What happens is when you're trying to drop that post, sometimes your weight's trying to go this way, but the post wants to go this way, so you do get some shearing. Now, I've never ridden the SCG dropper post. Maybe it's the post, maybe it's the angle, but it did take a little bit more concerted effort when you hit the lever to kind of like push your weight forward when you're sitting into it. It didn't want to drop as easily. The one thing I'm a little bummed about is that they started running the brake cables and everything inside the frame. So it looks awesome, but when you have to bleed the brakes or change the cables or swap brakes out, it's going to be a little bit more of a pain in the butt than it used to be. The upside to that is you no longer have the cables running along here where it could sometimes rub on the inside of your calf or knee. So it's pros and cons to that. Overall, I was really impressed with this bike. If you've been following Bike Rumor, you kind of know I'm a little bit of a Niner fanboy, but it's, you know, it's just a good bike. Everyone's been pretty thrilled with it, so it's worth a test ride, and we'll report back with actual weights and everything once we get our long-term bike in. Thanks for watching.